Okay, we're on live. Welcome everyone to the Ed Collab gathering Saturday. PD in your PJs, wonderful. We are session 1. So this is Let's All Get Woke, engaging students in conversations about race. And we are joined here today by 3 fabulous people. We have Shauna Capola. She's an expert in child and young adult literacy. And she includes practices that support a diversity of writing types and young writers. She's also the author of Renew, Become a Better and More Authentic Writing Teacher, as well as a number of other pieces that have been featured in magazines and blogs. We also have Arielle Johnson. She's a kindergarten teacher at Washington Elementary School in San Jose, California. She's an educator of 19 years. She has taught in districts across the United States, from Florida to Alaska to California, and has served at nearly every level of public education. And then finally, we have Kathy Collins, who is co-author with Matt Glover of the Heinemann title, I Am Reading. She's the beloved author of Growing Readers, as well as Reading for Real. She's worked closely with the Teachers College of Reading and Writing Project at Columbia University, and she was a first grade teacher in Brooklyn, New York. So welcome everyone. Ladies, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. So it looks like maybe we lost Arielle. I don't know. Yeah. But welcome everybody. Hopefully we'll get her back soon. So we are here to talk to you about how to engage students in conversations around race. And we're happy to sort of share some of our learning with you today, knowing also and making sure that it's understood that this is very much developing learning, and we're going to be sharing with you where we get a lot of our learning from, how we curate resources. So thank you so much for joining us today. And please make sure if questions come up to tweet them out, or you can ask. Diana is going to be looking at the tweets and making sure that we get some of those questions answered if possible at the end. Welcome back, Arielle. Yay. Happy to have you back. So do we want to start with our first slide, or our second slide? I think we wanted to make sure that it says woke or waking up. And we wanted to make sure that even though we had this great snappy title, Let's All Get Woke, Kathy and I wanted to make clear that as white educators, we don't feel as though there's ever going to be, this kind of endpoint of wokeness, that we are just continually going to be waking up. And I think that's important to acknowledge that.
And I would say also, we're like woke in progress in a way, because you wake up in different ways. Sometimes you're jarred awake. Something happens in the news, it jars you. Sometimes you're gently awakened by things you've read, the people you talk to. And so we hope today talks about how we could use all these different ways of all of us being in the process of waking up.
Yes, and also the 3 of us are planning to present at NCTE around this subject. And so we absolutely welcome any feedback that you might have. Like I said, questions that you think that we should be addressing. And granted, this is a different sort of time frame and a different format, but we definitely are open to as much feedback as you're willing to give. So thank you in advance for that.
Yeah.
Can you just talk, I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot, but Kathy had a really good carbon monoxide metaphor. Do you remember?
Yeah. And I'll allude back to it and later in the slides, but this idea of, I don't know, that race is, and racial issues are sort of like carbon monoxide. It's going on, it might be going on all around us, and we don't quite know until it's too late, or because we don't know it's there. In our classrooms, it can be an invisible noxious gas until then all of a sudden people are starting to get sick. And so we want to be, as teachers, carbon monoxide detectors, so that we can really quickly kind of jump in and not save the day, but help get kids into a safer place. I think that is what, I don't know, I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Arielle, I know that we lost you for a second. Is there anything you wanted to say before we sort of move forward in the slides?
I am just really grateful to be here today and thankful to be in the company of these brilliant women. And I wholeheartedly concur with that analogy. We have carbon monoxide detectors in our homes at all times. So I think that it's not about just responding to a crisis. Being woke is about being on all of the time, being preventative as well as proactive and reactive when necessary. So I think we're going to talk about all of those things today and hope to both inspire you and give you some strategies that you might use in your classroom.
That's right. And then if our next slide talks about the idea that, excuse me, when we're talking about race and we're talking about having discussions around race with students, that doesn't mean that we're always talking about oppression and struggle. It's really important to have these conversations about race in general, because clearly there is a discomfort in talking about race. And that's been made clear by many, many educators that we've talked to in particular.
And if it's always about oppression and struggle, it's so easy for us to say, no, that's wrong. I can't believe that happened. And then be done with it, but not see it as something that we're dealing with or that our children are dealing with daily in the classroom and out of the classroom.
Yeah, so the next slide has the link to a Padlet. This is a living document that we've created that we're going to continue to add to. And if you access the Padlet through the link, you will be able to also add to that Padlet. And the reason why we have that there is because we want to make very clear that we're all curating information, particularly Kathy and I, as white educators and white people living in the world. We are curating all of the amazing work that people of color have done up to this point. And so we wanted to make sure that we are paying homage to those people and letting you know transparently who we're learning from all the time, in addition to Arielle doing so much great work in her classroom. So that is definitely something that is not completed, and it's something that we want to continue to add to. So if you have any suggestions for that, definitely please add them. Or if you have anything on there that you feel should not be there, that maybe you have used that resource in a way that has caused some problems, and you feel strongly that it shouldn't be there, then definitely let us know that as well.
Good conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so Kathy.
Okay, so
next.
We want to just welcome you, everyone who's watching. We're operating under, I don't know if the right word would be presumption or assumption or sense of audience here. And there's 4 items you see on the slide. And we just would like you to think about if you were to check a box, which one most closely represents what brings you here today, that you're somebody who's already engaging and willing and enthusiastic about engaging in conversations about race, or are you somebody who would like to and you're just trying to get some starter tips, or just to think about it before you dive in, or are you somebody curious about, why would I do that? We don't have those issues in my school. What's the reason I would bring this up? I don't want to stir up any trouble. Or you could also be one of those and somebody who's trying to engage your colleagues and school community, because you might be working with adults who are unwilling, unable, unprepared. So you might be somebody here, a coach or a teacher trying to do some professional work. And there's not one, I was thinking about one that we didn't have here, and I want to just acknowledge you might be somebody here, and I use this word a little freely, I don't know, but hate watching, where you might be somebody who's like, oh gosh, what are they? So welcome we hope
Yeah.
that by the end that we might persuade you otherwise. So moving right along. So just find yourself and think about what brings you here. So Shauna and I, if you look at this slide showing on the, well, our right side, there's a little black poster that we made, or a flyer that we made. Shauna and I we're here together in New Hampshire. And there were some, well, just a little starter information. There were some racial incidents that happened in our children's school district, and to our school district's credit, the administration, school district-wide administration, very quickly dealt with it. They had community forums. They had some teacher training. But Sean and I were thinking, you know what, we should try to pull something together to think with elementary school teachers about it, because, you know, so often February is the month you talk about race, or you don't talk about it. And especially our children are educated here in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire, while not monolithic racially, our school district is, I think it's about 95% white students. So we came to kind of created a little workshop about talking about race in classrooms that are predominantly white. And so you look at this slide, those little talk bubbles, those are some things, not just from teachers here, but teachers around. We work in lots of schools, things that we've heard teachers say, and we'll just let you, I won't read them off, I'll just let you take a look at some of those. And I'm wondering if you, look at those and maybe think about which ones have you heard, which ones have you said, maybe to yourselves, and where are you, in your experience and in and around these talk bubbles? Do you guys want to add anything to that, or?
Well, just from our conversations, one of the things that we get a lot, or that we've heard in different situations, is why aren't you talking about diversity in general? Shouldn't we be talking about all kinds of diversity, gender diversity and ethnic diversity and religious diversity? And one of the things that we've said to people in regard to this that might help you have some language around it is when it's under the umbrella of diversity in general, often race is the first thing that gets shoved aside, because it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about race. And it's more comfortable for people to talk about gender diversity, or, other kinds of diversity. So that's definitely something that we've come across. And also this idea of, well, we don't have those issues in our school. Again, there's this idea that talking about race is all about talking about challenging, oppressive topics. And of course, those are important, and that should be a lot of what we're talking about. But it's also important to talk about race in general, about just being in the world as someone who has a race, including someone who's white.
Mm-hmm. And so the next couple slides, we won't spend too much time, because you can they can access these slides. They'll be on the Padlet. If people want to look at the details of these, the text of these. But just so we took some of these common things that we hear people say and found quick resources to respond to those. So Shauna that was the Children's Community School. You pulled that.
Yeah.
This idea that kids, well, we don't want to talk. They're just 6 years old, and you can look across this, this graphic infographic, just to see some of the research around, what children understand from social cues from the time they're infants.
Yeah, there's one that particular idea of what's developmentally appropriate, or our kids aren't ready to talk about that, is often said by people in positions of privilege. And one of the people who participated in one of the workshops that Kathy and I did mentioned that particular idea that about developmental appropriateness is code for I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. And then we'll go to the next slide real quick. So the next one is where people are thinking they don't have racial problems in school. And this Beverly Tatum quote, I just think nails it when so you may believe you don't have racial problems in school, because they might not be manifest and through action or incident, but outside of school there's so many stereotypes, distortions going on. And this is to the point about the carbon monoxide. She calls it smog in the air, and we just we do need to talk about it to bring some fresh air to the some of this smog and toxin that kids are bringing into the classroom from the outside. And then finally, one more slide with people's talk bubbles is the that idea of, well, we don't need to talk about it because we're a kind classroom. We deal with kindness to everybody. But yes, this is the quote in the middle. Feedback is key to our ability to recognize and repair inevitable and often aware collusion. The Yale Child Studies Center, Walter Gilliam and fellow researchers discovered that teachers' implicit bias against Black students starts in preschool. The recent resource about that is Dr. Kim Parker's blog post about her experiences with her son and his preschool. And I'd refer to, is that on the Padlet? We should add.
No, we should add that.
We'll put that on the Padlet. But so it's really important when we see something, say something in our classrooms, and not in the scary New York City subway way, but a little in the scary emotional way, I guess. But yeah, anyway.
And Arielle, I know you can speak to that too, as far as the age of students and when things start to become aware, when they start to become aware of race.
Yes, they are definitely aware very early, and I will speak to that a little bit later. But I've had some experiences with kindergartners, so it's never too soon. It's never too early, and Dr. Kim Parker is a personal friend of mine, and I know that was a very harrowing experience for her. And I also know her child, and he is a beautiful, incredible, brilliant human being. And, acting as if these things are not real and as if it's not happening is killing our children, quite literally. So,
yeah, and
right now.
Thank you. And in predominantly white spaces, like many schools that we are in and around too, kids in kindergarten, just like with kids that Arielle has talked to and taught, they know so much more than we give them credit for. They're aware of so much more than we give them credit for. And so it's just incredibly important. And there was a tweet thread, I think it started yesterday too, that we should add. I don't remember who started it, but they asked people of color to say when was the first time that someone called them the N-word.
Oh my gosh.
And those responses were very telling as well. So I think that would be an incredible text to use as well with this work.
And the last part of this section of the presentation is these were some norms that Shauna and I were using. This is like 6 or 8 months ago, I think, right? In our workshops. And just to we're sharing this with you because we looked at this as we were planning today's session, and we were like, no, we've already have huge revisions with these, and we'll leave it at that. I mean, I'll leave it at that, and invite Arielle and Shauna to chime in. But there's to use your word, problematic faves with some of this, and so just by way of examples, we're constantly chasing woke, trying to figure it out and to see, what, or to make changes and we're always revising. So.
Yeah. And we humbly bring you this visual because this is hard. It's hard for us to show, sort of where we were 6 months ago and where we are now, it's tough to show kind of your flaws and to say, well, you know, we have different understandings about this now.
Well, and this, reading this book
Yeah,
and what Matthew K says about safe spaces really knocked us around a little bit, especially with regard to starting a conversation with these assumptions and norms.
Yeah, as did What Does It Mean to Be White by Robin DiAngelo, who also wrote White Fragility. And then she also collaborated on this one, Is Everyone Really Equal?
Do I detect an author study?
I know. Good
Oh my
idea.
gosh. Okay.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next slide. So obviously with this particular format and the time that we have, we can talk, we have a very limited scope as far as how to help you sort of begin to engage in conversations around race with your students. And so we're going to talk about one particular way that we find to be helpful, and that is to use texts as entry points for conversations. And we use that term text as a broad umbrella term. So we're not just talking about books, we're talking about video texts, audio texts, photo essays, and you'll see all of that reflected on our Padlet. But we find that it's important to sort of, or it's easier to use text as sort of an entry point, because when you do so, you can sort of riff off of the questions and the wonderings and the statements that students are making, and use that to build curriculum around this work. But we also do work when we talk to educators doing this work. We also talk about the importance of sort of looking forward and saying, okay, so here's a text that I would like to use. What might some questions be that come up? What might they notice, knowing my children right now who I'm teaching, and being sort of aware of that and proactive so that you can address some of those questions as they come up. But we can never do it all. So these are just some examples. There are so many texts that you can use as entry points for conversations. So the first one is the doll test that is accessible on our Padlet. And this was actually two psychologists in the 1940s actually created this test as a way to provide expert testimony in the case of Brown v. Board of Education. And this is a different iteration of that. It's a more sort of modern iteration of that, that my students in particular that I've worked with it's really resonated with them. And whenever we talk about what are the texts that we've looked at that have really sort of stuck with you, that is one that sticks with them most often. So I definitely recommend that you check that out. All the Colors We Are, the story of how we get our skin color, is another great one. And it goes into the science of skin color and talks about how we get the different pigments in our skin and why. And it's just an excellent book, and it's beautiful too. There's beautiful illustration, beautiful photographs in there. One of my other favorites is Lovely by Jess Hong. And one of the reasons why I love this one is because, first of all, it's not called beautiful. So it's not fetishizing this idea of beauty. It's just lovely. And it has, well, I sort of feel like, I'm not sure about the copyright stuff, I'm not gonna, but there's so many great people or characters in this book of all different colors, all different walks of life. And it just is a nice book to sort of return to again and again with kids of all ages, to just talk about, what are you noticing? And that can be the catalyst for some good conversations. So those are three. The next slide has three other ones that we recommend as well. Again, making sure that you're including texts where people in the text, or people in the stories, that the characters are simply just being in the world as well, which is why The Snowy Day is just such a beautiful text. And then, because there are so many texts to look at, and it's hard to know, what kind of text should I use, or which text should I use, I think there's on the Padlet, there's a place where there are blogs and people to follow. And one of my favorite resources is the See What We See blog. And they have an incredible list of texts with their ratings that they have created for them. So if there's a problematic element to them, they will address that and talk about it. And it's just something that I access all the time. It's wonderful. So I definitely recommend that as well. So the next slide talks about some questions we might ask when we look at texts with children or with grown-ups. And so I won't go through all of these, but definitely questions around whose voice is being heard, whose story is being told, whose is not, who is represented here, who is not. And that hashtag own voices is an important one. And this was actually coined by writer Corinne Doivas. And it's meant as sort of a shorthand for books with diverse characters who are written by authors that are part of that group, part of that often marginalized group or minoritized group, or who share those identities, which is really important when you're talking about representation and just in general, whose stories are being told and by whom are they being told. So those are really important. It's an important hashtag to follow. And, when you're considering looking at texts and trying to decide which ones to bring in, that's something definitely to keep in mind. So other considerations regarding text on the next slide. This is something that comes up all the time in my work with kids and with grown-ups, is that talking about race itself is not inherently racist. We just had an incident at our local high school where that was the case. I had a friend whose son pointed out in a picture, they were asked to look at a photograph of soldiers, I believe from World War II or the Civil War, I don't remember which. And what do you notice? What do you wonder? And one of the things that this child noticed was that there were many Black soldiers, and a bunch of classmates jumped on him and said, "Oh, that's racist." No, it's not. Talking about race is not itself racist. And also that white is a race and it is not the default, which often I think is sort of implied when talking about race, that it doesn't matter, whiteness doesn't matter. And talking about whiteness as a race is equally as important as talking about other races and, how whiteness impacts the world and how whiteness impacts everybody is important to talk about as well. Matt Kay in his book, Not Light But Fire, again, we're going to show this one. He talks about how useful it is to have conversations that sort of relate to overarching themes or that have bigger contexts, like maybe you're talking about identity as a bigger theme, or about conflict or representation. So that you can thread all of these texts together and they don't sit on their own, but they're really threaded together within a context that is more easily understood by students. And then again, we talked about representation and making sure that in the text that you choose, that it's not always about a character's struggle or a character's experience with oppression, that we are sharing texts and using texts with people and characters of all kinds of races, and they're just being in the world. And we can talk about race through those kinds of texts as well. So it's 11:30. We want to give Arielle some time to talk about her experiences as a teacher, and she has so much to offer that it was hard to sort of figure out how do we get this down to the limited time we have. So I'm going to turn it over to Arielle, and then at the end, if there are questions, we can address those.
Hello, everyone. I'm that OCD person, so as I glance down, you'll know that I'm just reading my notes that I've written. Hi, my name is Arielle. I'm from a townhouse in San Jose, California, and I'm from the terror of colonization, of growing up Black in a predominantly white small southern town. I'm from Maya, Zora, Langston, and Chinua, and I'm from a literary canon undisrupted. I am from doors of no return, heavy with remorse and creaking with sorrow, because I am from injustice. And I am from a jet-lagged disembarkation where soft ladies wrapped in kente cloth greet people like me with warm embraces and authentic apologies. Welcome home, my sister. I am from colorblind teachers decades away from being aware of the discrepancies between their intent and their impact. I'm from a teacher, my grandmother, Bobby Lee Mitchell McKinney, a Black woman who earned a master's degree in the early 1950s, whose intent made the greatest impact, thereby bringing me to you today. Hi, my name is Arielle, and I'd like to spend my time with you today begging, no, imploring you to become racially literate. I want you to embrace the nuances and complexities of talking about race in your classroom and beyond it, so that our nation, as I heard my brother Cornelius Minor say a couple of weeks ago, can become what it says it is, a land of liberty and justice for all. But before we can face children, we must face ourselves. I came to this work from a place much different than my dear friends Kathy and Shauna, not just because I'm a person of color, but also because for the majority of my career, I have taught at schools where the student population was primarily composed of students who are Indigenous and/or of color, but not necessarily mine. For 11 years, I had the privilege of living side by side with Inupiaq and Yupik Native Alaskans in rural villages. Though I was teacher by title, I became a learner under the tutelage of the most authentic people I have ever known. They taught me things I didn't know that I didn't know. They taught me to center my students in their identities. They taught me how to be an accomplice to other people who are Indigenous and of color. My mother didn't send me to school to learn about being Black. She taught me that at home, I said as I stormed out of the professional development room. I was livid, filled with righteous indignation. Later, as I began waking up, I would discover that this anger was in reality grief. I'd been duped. The public education system I'd experienced growing up was not designed to maintain the dignity of folks like me. I'd been tasked with serving on a committee that would work to create units of study that centered our Inupiaq students' identity based on a framework designed by elders, parents, and Inupiaq educators. I was excited to serve. I thought I got it. I thought I was woke. But the moment I was forced to truly see my children, to center them and allow them to be visible, I became a raging storm. Why? Why do we react in this way? We storm out, we cry, because decolonizing our minds requires both intellectual and emotional labor. It forces us to interact with hard truths, and the truth is, our schools will not be pillars of justice until teachers, all teachers, do the work personally. And the longer we put this work off, the more deeply entrenched the systems that perpetuate inequity and underwrite privilege become. I eventually came to my senses for the reason I always do. The children led me to the light. They are my teachers, and not to learn from them, as Paulo Freire said, creates a kind of violence. Ngozi wa Thiong'o termed this the psychological violence of the classroom. When we fail to address race with our students and continuously teach both proactively and responsively, the violence we enact becomes violence students enact against one another. Last school year, my first in San Jose, I was constantly under surveillance as a new teacher in my school district. Regular unannounced walkthroughs created a bit of fear. I wanted to do what was right for kids, but I also loved to eat. I knew I needed to address race explicitly in my kindergarten classroom, but I tarried a bit, leaning mostly on my richly diverse classroom library and our tacit understandings as a classroom community with only Black and brown children and adults in it. This was an egregious error. In my efforts to protect myself, I failed what matters most, my children. I reflected on my experience through this writing. Teaching is hard every day, but today was especially difficult. A few weeks ago, one of my Mexican students, we'll call her Haley, Asked my Vietnamese student, we'll call her Joy, why don't you eat human food? I did a lot of racial literacy work with them in response to that behavior and some social emotional work as well. A couple of days ago, we were having a challenging morning. Every emotion, all of them, seemed to be present in the room at once. I gathered the children for a class meeting, haphazardly pulling some toy animals out of a container to reenact the troubling scene so we could uncover the source of our problems and hopefully find some solutions. More than I could have ever predicted was revealed. As I played out the scenario with the children, I, without intention, used two bears to model the students' ideas for finding solutions. Haley piped up and said, "Oh, they made up because they're the same. They belong together." "Can you say more about that, Haley?" I asked. "Yes, different doesn't belong together. Like you. You don't belong with us, Miss J, because you're black. Dark doesn't go with us. You could play with Sarah," another very dark-skinned Mexican child. "She's dark." Sarah wasn't having any of it. "Haley, if you start saying only people who are alike can be together, someone is going to get left out. What if we said, I only want to play with kids who speak English? Then Jennifer wouldn't have any friends. That would be sad. Do you want to be treated like that?" "No," Haley responded. Today we read Let's Talk About Race to dive even further into the topic. During the read aloud, Haley walked into the front of the room, telling us that she had something to share. With tears streaming down her face, she told us that she had been bullied by dark brown children while she was in preschool. It was clear a lot of pent-up anger and pain was living in her 6-year-old body. As she released it, the other children were overcome with empathy and compassion. Before I could say a word, several children were embracing her and expressing sincere concern. But Sarah said, "We didn't do that to you, Haley." We continued reading. When we got to the end of the book, she concluded, "Well, this is a new class. Everyone loves me here. We shouldn't not play with people because they are different. We play with everyone." We talked about how hurt people sometimes hurt other people, how trauma begets trauma, and why harboring prejudices can be harmful. Tomorrow we'll delve into stereotypes and the danger of a single story. But right now, as I sit here alone, all I can think about is this little love. We've talked about race since she made her human food comment. We've told our stories all year. We've talked about our feelings and our thoughts all year. And now, 10 days before the school year ends, this child finally had everything she needed to stand before us, teary-eyed, and share her experiences. When she did, she was met with compassion, yes, but also with some tough love that compelled her to reconsider her position. She's 6 years old, and it took a year's worth of face-to-face emotional labor and unconditional love to get to this turning point. I wonder what this conversation is like in 3rd grade, if kids are having it for the first time then. How about 6th grade? Freshman year, senior year? As we came to the end of the school year, we cracked open our experiences together one more time. On the last day of school, just before our final read aloud, we had a conversation that went like this. Me: "We've learned so much through our read alouds this year. Which book was your favorite?" Michelle: "I really love The Bad Seed because he made poor choices sometimes, just like me." Haley: "Yeah, but you can change, like he did. We can always change. Remember how I used to not like dark brown people, but now I play with everybody?" That story ended well. I see Haley almost daily, though she is no longer in my class. Her transformation seems to have been real. That could have gone another way just as easily. This year, I knew I had to begin to teach racial literacy from day one. One of our first projects was to read several texts about the diversity of skin color. Then we each mixed jars of paint until we had hues that perfectly matched our skin to use for our projects throughout the year. I tweeted a photo of the display of those jars of paint with books and student quotes, thinking a teacher friend or two might try it out. The tweet went viral, liked over 80,000 times. The seemingly small actions of an elementary teacher to provide her students with the opportunity to see themselves and their peers became part of an international, I've seen articles in Portuguese and even Hungarian, movement toward racial justice. My tiny little tweet that could affirm the wounded children still living inside of so many of us and provided hope for a better future for all of us. One where we openly talk about race and make our schools inclusive places where students and teachers do not have to be rendered invisible, thus creating a double consciousness in order to learn. Surrendering ourselves is much too high a price to pay for an education. Friends, it is our responsibility to broach this difficult topic with kids. Silence is not neutral. Silence is prejudice. Silence is political. Silence is deadly. And even as we teach racial literacy through diverse classroom libraries, deep conversations, and meaningful experiences, we mustn't forget that racism is systemic and must be dismantled with this truth in mind. Therefore, our pedagogy must be rooted in freedom, which means we must first set ourselves free. My name is Arielle. I am from children who implore me to keep waking up, to keep setting myself free. I'm from the new world they and I are co-creating. We are from each other, and we cling daily to the truth of Gwendolyn Brooks' words. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. We are all inheritors of the American dream. Thank you.
I love you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I love you
Yes.
too.
Arielle, geez.
Thank you for having the courage and the desire to sort of put yourself out there like that. I don't know, I feel like.
Yeah. And your journey too. And just for all of us, we all probably have, that was me then, this is me now. And I think for anybody starting this journey to just go back and say, do you have a little teeny dark spot of around this where I used to say, I used to think, I used to joke about, and you see growth if you can look at that and at least know, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore. Then you've got this whole world open of what am I going to do now? If I'm not doing that, there's so much else I have to do. You're to you.
Hard hands.
That's hard hands. All the hands to you. Thank you.
I also think, well, first of all, I don't know if you saw when you were reading your beautiful work, but my stomach was growling so loud. So
I was totally like that.
hopefully, I think we were muted. I know we were muted, but it was like, we were like giggling because it was hard. It was so loud. But I guess one of the things, just to add on to what you were saying, Kathy, is that I think once you start seeing, you can't unsee. Once you start noticing, once you start waking up, you're not going to go to sleep again. It's just impossible to do so, which is why it's so important to just kind of take that first step if you haven't already and start this work, because your children, your students, they're not going to, they'll never unsee. You're planting seeds and nuggets that are going to bloom for a long time to come. And so we just want to thank you for being with us today and for participating in this. And we want to just reiterate that we are going to be presenting together in another couple of months or a month and a half. And we welcome any feedback that you might have. If you have questions that you weren't ready to sort of give us now, or that if you're looking at this later on or processing it and they come up, please feel free to get in touch with us. There, at the beginning of this, there was, I believe, a slide with our contact information. And also please access the Padlet, use it, add to it. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
you, California.
Yay!
Yay,
Thank
Arielle.
you, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see you guys.
Yeah, same here. Love to you. And Diana, thank you.
Yes.
And Ed Collab, thanks for hosting.
So much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, all right, everyone. There are no words right now, so I'm not gonna I can't really get it together, but it was phenomenal. So thank you for sharing your voice, really. It's funny, we had practice sessions and it just not knowing who I was working with, it was amazing. So my job right now is to close out this session and invite our audience to session 2. So you should be seeing a session card. Unfortunately, session number 4 with Dana is canceled today, but you have 3 amazing options for the next hour that begin at noon, 12 p.m. Eastern. So we have session number 5, Books, An Avenue for Change, How a Great Book Can Change Us, Teach Empathy, Acceptance, and Build a Community in Our Classrooms Through Social Action Projects. Just a little plug, these 2 teachers are from the district I work in. It's going to be an amazing session. Then we also have the session by Carla España and Luz Herrera, Bilingual, Ike, Translanguaging in Children, Middle Grade and Young Adult, Latinx Literature for grades 3 through 8, and that's session number 6. And then we also have Getting Real, Finding Balance During the Literacy Block with Trisha Abarvia and Kate Roberts. So stay tuned, go to your next session, just click on the box. Everything is going to be streamed live in a few minutes. Thanks for joining us.